Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a really fascinating and frankly heavily debated set of data. We're looking at Warwick's proposed municipal budget for fiscal year 2027. We're going to unpack a recent report by Robert Cushman called The Warwick Taxpayer Burden and Municipal Salary Growth. Our goal here? To objectively look at the raw numbers pulled straight from the proposed budget documents and figure out exactly what they mean for everyday residents like you. It's essentially a tale of two realities: the proposed compensation growth inside city administration and the very real economic pressures facing the taxpayers who actually fund it. So, right off the bat, the report poses a super direct question. How much of a raise are you getting this year? Seriously, think about it. Is it 5%, 3%, maybe nothing at all? It's a really important baseline to establish. Most of us in the private sector are pretty used to standard cost of living adjustments, if we even get them. Keep your own personal percentage in the back of your mind as we go through this, because it sets absolutely crucial context for the city's financial data we're about to dive into. All right, let's look at the big picture. When you factor in raises, overtime, benefits, and seasonal salaries, the proposed budget shows overall compensation for city workers jumping by over $3.5 million. I mean, $3.5 million. That is a massive aggregate figure. When the city tallies up its obligations for the upcoming year, this is the total extra cost for municipal employee compensation that taxpayers are being asked to cover. But to really wrap our heads around a number that big, we need to break it down and look at the specific line items driving this surge. And this is where the data gets truly staggering. We are not talking about your standard 3 to 5% adjustments here. The data shows some unbelievable percentage jumps for a single year. Look at this. At the very top, the assistant superintendent of the sewer department is slated for a 27.5% increase, the board of canvassers clerk a 23.7% bump, and a supervisor of highway field maintenance is looking at a 22.8% raise. So the report poses a very pointed question. Why on earth are some of these raises approaching the 20 to 27% mark in just one single budget cycle? To ground those huge percentages in some concrete financial reality, let's look at a specific dollar amount: $24,702. That right there is the proposed single-year raise for the executive director of the sewer department. The proposal bumps their salary from $125,628 to $150,330. That's nearly a 20% increase, basically 25 grand of extra base pay in a single year. It perfectly illustrates how these steep percentage increases translate into major dollar amounts on the city ledger, which obviously contributes heavily to that massive $3.5 million overall spike we just talked about. Now, just to be completely clear, these aren't estimates. Looking directly at the source ledger provided in the report, sorted by the highest percentage increases, you can see these numbers are pulled verbatim from the city's proposed FY2027 budget documents. Right at the top, there's the assistant superintendent of the sewer department, jumping from roughly 75 grand to almost 96 grand. And as you scan down the list, you see multiple positions from plumbing inspectors to library tech aides slated for raises of 20% or more. The report highlights the sheer concentration of double-digit increases at the top of the payroll to bring it right to the public's attention. Moving a bit further up into the administration, we hit what the report considers a particularly eye-opening figure: $182,636. This is the total proposed compensation for the chief of staff/manager position, which is a role split between the mayor's office and city planning. Their compensation is slated to rise from just over $175,000 to this new high of over $182,000. The point the author is making here is that this significant compensation growth isn't just isolated to the departmental level. It extends way up into the upper tiers of city management and the mayor's office as well. Okay, so this brings us to a really critical pivot point in our explainer. The report asks a rhetorical but deeply vital question: how many private sector residents are receiving raises anywhere close to this? We've just looked at single-year raises of 20 to 27%, individual bumps of over 24 grand. The source material is asking us to hold those municipal numbers up against the economic reality of the everyday folks living and working in Warwick. Are the citizens footing the bill for this $3.5 million increase experiencing that kind of financial growth themselves? And that creates this central friction. On one hand, you have municipal salary and benefit growth approaching 20 to 27% for certain roles. On the other hand, you have Warwick senior citizens trying to survive on fixed incomes. The data clearly points out that for many seniors, their Social Security bumps are barely keeping pace with basic inflation. Yet, these are the exact same residents who are expected to pay the rising property taxes required to fund those staggering municipal compensation increases. For many of these seniors, this growing tax burden isn't just annoying, it actively threatens their ability to afford staying in their own homes. It is literally a tale of two entirely different financial trajectories playing out within the exact same city limits. And it's not happening in a vacuum. The report details a sort of perfect storm of accumulating taxpayer burdens. Work families are being asked to pay higher property taxes. They're having to absorb rising utility costs. Everyone is navigating higher prices for basic food and gas at the grocery store. On top of all that, the city is facing hundreds of millions of dollars in new school borrowing, alongside rising debt, pension obligations, and retiree healthcare costs. Every single one of these factors just keeps stacking up, putting relentless compounding pressure on the household budgets of working families and retirees who are just trying to make ends meet. This storm hits our most vulnerable populations the hardest: fixed incomes versus rising taxes. The report places a massive emphasis on this specific dynamic. Many residents, especially our seniors, are falling further and further behind financially every single year. Think about it. When your income is totally fixed, but your property taxes continually go up to support a growing municipal payroll, your fundamental ability to keep a roof over your head is put in jeopardy. The source makes it clear. Taxpayers aren't against fair pay for city workers. Not at all. But there's a breaking point where the taxes required to fund $3.5 million in municipal compensation growth actually destabilize the lives of the residents paying them. Which leads us directly to the central philosophical argument of the source material. Quote, "At some point, Warwick needs to have an honest conversation about shared sacrifice." This right here is the absolute anchor of the report's conclusion. It suggests that the burden of navigating inflation, rising costs, and massive city debt just cannot fall exclusively on the shoulders of the taxpayers. If everyday citizens are forced to tighten their belts and make tough sacrifices to afford living in Warwick, well, the report argues the city's budgeting philosophy needs to reflect that exact same reality. So what does that actually look like in practice? According to the report, shared sacrifice can't just be a catchy buzzword applied only to taxpayers. It has to comprehensively include the government itself. It has to include elected officials. It has to include city administrators. And, crucially, as the data showed us today, it has to include a hard, honest look at municipal compensation growth. The argument is super straightforward. If long-term financial stability in Warwick is the goal, then everyone who lives, works, and governs in the city has to be part of the solution. They have to share the weight of fiscal responsibility. And that brings us to the report's ultimate demand: transparency. Before the city asks taxpayers to shoulder even more taxes, more borrowing, and more debt, the author argues we need a serious, wide-open public discussion. We need to talk about affordability. Can residents actually pay for this? We need to talk about sustainability. Is a budget relying on 20 to 27% raises realistic in the long run? And a discussion about priorities. Does the city prioritize rapid municipal compensation growth over the financial security of its fixed-income seniors? The taxpayers, the report insists, absolutely deserve clear answers to these questions. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful question from the source material to close out our explainer. How much more can taxpayers absorb? After looking at the data, the $3.5 million overall increase, those double-digit percentage raises, and the starkly contrasting struggles of seniors on fixed incomes facing higher property taxes just to keep their homes, it really all boils down to sustainability. Can the everyday residents of Warwick continue to fund this trajectory? It's a deeply provocative question, and one the numbers suggest needs an answer sooner rather than later. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the data and keep learning.